In 1999, students Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold would embark on a massacre that would make history.
People were getting shot all around me.
And the name of one Colorado high school synonymous with tragedy.
Children were running from the school at breakneck speeds, and I knew that the world had changed.
As the clock ticked,
That guy is in a black trench coat. Turning the black guy.
the body count rose,
They would pop underneath a table, they would say something like peekaboo, and they would shoot someone.
and with it the question, why had these two young men waged war on their classmates and teachers?
A bullet entered the side of my backpack, spun around and actually shot me in the back.
And committed the world's most notorious killing spree.
What caused them to have so much hatred they were willing to walk in and kill as many people as possible?
In 1999, the area of Columbine, on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, had been the epitome of ordinary.
It's a suburban area. It's pretty quiet, not a lot of crime. It's overwhelmingly white, middle class, which is to say a very homogeneous place.
But one spring day in 1999 would bring the unremarkable neighborhood worldwide notoriety.
You know, April 20th of '99 was a typical day. I was eager to get my grades bumped up because I was 15 at the time, so getting a driver's permit was definitely on the horizon.
The morning definitely was just a regular day. Starting my shift, I was an emergency response specialist. I just took regular phone calls to the sheriff's office, as well as the 911 phone calls.
Normal day, we had ran a couple, basic calls, medical calls.
It was just like any other day. I went off to work. I was leaving that day for a conference in another part of our state.
Tom's 15-year-old son made his way to Columbine High School.
Daniel was a very shy kid. Very shy, very reserved, very sweet, a very lovable kid. He was someone who, even as a teenager, was not ashamed to give his mom a big hug.
For fellow students, 16-year-old Craig Scott and his 17-year-old sister Rachel, the morning had not started harmoniously.
My sister was in the car. She was honking her horn because I was making us late. And I had to have my hair just perfect. And we got into the car together, and she was kind of getting on to me about being late. And we got into an argument. This is the road that Rachel and I were on together to go to school. And Rachel would pull into here to drop me off. She was just asking me not to make us late all the time, and so we were kind of back and forth in an argument, and we pulled up to the school, and I got out of the car, and I turned and I looked at her, and I slammed the car door shut. And I walked in the school. I had no idea that'd be the last time that I'd see Rachel alive.
Around 11:19 a.m., Columbine School, West Entrance. Sean Graves and his friend's world was about to change forever.
For lunch, there was 3 of us that day that chose not to eat. Dan Robaugh, Lance Kirkland, and myself. We stepped out the side door like we typically would. We'd usually grab a soda at the vending machines right there, and we'd just jet up and take the path off. Only that morning, things were a little different. We were looking up at the top of the dirt hill, and we saw two guys that were wearing all black, their black trench coats, and with them they were carrying a couple of black duffel bags. We witnessed them loading weapons that we just assumed were toys, and that's when it started. They showered us with rounds, and Dan and Lance both went down.
One floor above, in the library, Craig and his friend Matt were sitting revising.
You know, we thought that we were hearing fireworks. We saw students running away from the school. They were trekking through the soccer field. You know, we thought that, you know, it was a senior prank. It's about that time for the end of the year for some silly prank to happen. It was a tradition.
But this was no prank. A nightmare that would shock the world had just begun. At approximately 11:19 a.m. on the 20th of April 1999, a deadly killing spree had begun at Columbine High School in Colorado. Outside the school cafeteria, 15-year-old student Sean Graves and his friends Dan and Lance were being fired on by two teenagers dressed in black trench coats.
My body was completely behind a concrete wall, so I was protected. The only thing on me that was sticking past that was my backpack. A bullet entered the side of my backpack, spun around and actually shot me in the back and shot out my right hip. And at that moment, I lost my legs completely. I was paralyzed from the waist down immediately.
What Sean had originally thought was a prank was far from it.
I found myself laying halfway in the school and halfway out. And at that moment, I knew that my worst nightmare had come true. Months, possibly years before the shooting actually took place, I had a reoccurring nightmare of somebody in my family or even myself being paralyzed. It didn't make any sense then, but the second I looked back at my legs, I realized that that dream had come true, and I was the one that was going to be paralyzed.
Sean lay in the doorway of the cafeteria, and for hundreds of students inside, the reality of what was happening was beginning to sink in.
All I remember from that moment was just the fear in their eyes, looking at me, and I'm sure I had fear looking back. And that's when the fire alarm went off and the cafeteria started to evacuate.
911. Yes, this is Sharon at Columbine High School. We have shots being fired. Okay. The guy is in a black trench coat. Checking the front guy. They just shot somebody inside the cafeteria. I'm going to have to try and get out here and call you back.
Over the prior year, the two mystery shooters had made several extraordinary videos. Both spoof and serious, that were chillingly similar to the spree to come. The violent, merciless attacks played out in the videos had now become a reality.
The two shooters walked down to try and finish off everyone, and I watched one of the shooters shoot Lance in the face.
At Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, Detective Kate Batten was just returning from an early lunch.
I asked what was going on. They said that there was a shooting at Columbine High School. So at that point, I started driving towards Columbine. And that's when it became surreal, because the dispatcher was talking about snipers on the roof. They were talking about bombs exploding. And I'm just astounded that this is information that's being relayed in suburban Littleton.
My secretary ran in, the door was shut, and she said, There's been a report of shootings or gunfire and bombs exploding. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I came out of my office and I ran down here, and as I looked down the corridor, I saw a gunman coming towards me with the shotgun. When I was staring down and I made contact, it seemed like the size of a cannon. All I kept thinking is what it was going to feel like to be shot. You know, I thought of my family. Was I going to die quickly? Each time a bullet was fired from the gun, then glass would shatter behind me. I hear bullets exploding in that area. And what really probably saved my life is girls coming out of the gymnasium in this crossing hall. They were coming into the crossfire, and I wanted to make sure that they were not hit by the gunman's gunfire. I ran down to this hallway, and I was able to get the girls into the gymnasium area.
Emergency.
Well, we just got a frantic call from my daughter saying he's chasing us with a gun, and then she hung up the phone, and you could hear the screaming in the hallways.
Yeah.
6 weeks earlier, March the 16th, 1999, in the mountains south of Columbine. The two shooters recorded another video. This time, the weapons were real.
That's a slug. Imagine that in someone's brain.
Both were students at Columbine High School, just weeks away from graduating.
Oh. Entry exit.
17-year-old Dylan Klebold and 18-year-old Eric Harris.
No, no, no.
Harris was a young man that was in advanced classes. You know, he had dreams of going to the military. He applied to enlist in the Marines. Klebold was a kid who a few weeks prior had visited one of the state universities in Arizona, so his plan was to go to college. Klebold was at prom 3 nights prior.
Now both Harris and Klebold seemed intent on the destruction of the school and everyone in it. By 11:27 a.m., the two shooters were in an area near the library where Craig Scott and numerous fellow students were working.
We're hearing the firecrackers. We're thinking that it's a prank. We're laughing, we're joking about it. And then that's when a teacher ran into the room. She ran over to the phone. She got on the phone to call the police.
Jefferson County 911.
The phone rings, and you know, I had a caller on the other end of the line who stated that something was happening at Columbine High School.
There is a student here with a gun. He has shot out a window.
There was children in the library, and she wanted to, obviously, you know, protect them and take care of them.
Under the table, kids! Heads under the table!
She saw the shots happen. She knew this was serious. She knew this was real.
Okay. We've got help on the way, ma'am. Okay. Okay. Oh, God! Stay in the line with me. Oh, God! Kids, just stay down.
I got underneath the table with my buddy Matt, and then my friend Isaiah. He came and he sat next to me.
Still lying paralyzed in the cafeteria doorway, 15-year-old Sean could do nothing but listen.
I can hear explosions going off upstairs, and I can hear people screaming, and I can hear gunshots just echoing throughout the school, and there's just chaos everywhere.
I've got every student in this library on the floor. You better stay on the floor. We have paramedics, we have fire, and we have police en route.
We were just sitting down to lunch, and the tones went off for a reported possible drive-by shooting near Columbine High School. My partner and I jumped into the medic unit and started heading towards Columbine. As we pulled up, several students running by, and one young gal had a bullet hole in her, I believe, right calf. We treated her.
After several minutes shooting and throwing homemade bombs in the corridor outside, Harris and Klebold now approached the library entrance, where the teacher was under the desk, on the line to 911 dispatch.
I remember trying to get her to close the doors and lock them to keep everyone in.
Is there any way you can block the door so no one can get in? I do not. She's right outside that door. I'm afraid to go to the door. It's okay.
It was trying to keep her calm so that I could, you know, figure out what was going on.
I'm really glad he's right here. I think he's yelling at everybody to get up right now. Please don't alive there.
I'll rip off your goddamn head!
Dylan was a family friend of our kids for a long time. He grew up here, sort of.
Dylan was here a lot. The kids met each other in the first grade and became best friends.
Hey, what's going on, dude? This is Dylan.
There were never fights. A lot of kids you have to send home after a while because, you know, it gets with boys. It was great. The three of them got along great.
He was a nice, gentle young man.
Dylan Klebold was born in Colorado, and at the time of the shooting was living in his parents' designer home in a desirable natural area just outside the town.
Dylan's parents, they were intellectuals and artists at heart. They had met at Ohio State University in the art program.
They didn't believe in spanking. They didn't believe in guns. They didn't believe in war. They were pacifists.
Eric Harris's background was also far from underprivileged.
Eric's father was ex-military. He was a decorated Air Force test pilot.
It required them to bounce around a bit from city to city as his father would get transferred, but lived in normal, middle-class neighborhoods, not living in the inner city and subject to gangs or drugs or violence. It did affect Eric, however, always having to move to another school, make new friends again. That was tough for him.
I hate most people.
Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were both deeply into computers, and both complained they were victims of bullying by sporty students known as jocks. After settling in the Columbine area, Harris became friends with Klebold, and as such also hung out with Dylan's friend Brooks Brown. But it would not always be a smooth relationship.
He had thrown a snowball at Brooks's car and cracked the windshield. And a kid came up and said, "Here's Eric's backpack. I took it while he was throwing the snowballs." So I'm thinking, well, what's this? I'm gonna take the backpack back. So we drove down in the car and I rolled down the window and I said to Eric, "I've got your backpack, meet me at your mom's house." And we rolled back up the window. Well, he started banging on the window crazy, saying, "Give me my backpack." He was frantic. That was the first time I saw that anger. And it was very unusual. It was quick and it was fast and it was unrelenting.
I will frickin' kill you! I'm gonna pull out a goddamn shotgun!
The 20th of April, 1999, 11:29 a.m. Columbine High School, Western Side. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold entered the library where 4 staff members and 52 students were hiding.
As soon as they came in, they were shooting off their guns. They began to yell at students. They were making some mocking comments.
Nobody, whatever their race, sex, or social status, would be safe from the killing spree.
The first person that they killed was Kyle Velasquez, who didn't know to hide. He had a disability, and he liked simple things. His family said he liked panda bears, he liked coloring, and they became the bully.
What would happen next in that library would horrify the world. Throughout 1998 and early 99, Columbine High School students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, had made a number of home videos themed around violence. On April the 20th, just weeks before they were both due to graduate, fantasy became reality. At 11:29 a.m., they entered the library. Like his fellow students, 16-year-old Craig Scott was hiding under a table with his friends Matt and Isaiah.
A lot of students were being quiet. Some girls were crying, and some girls were begging for their life.
911 dispatcher Rene Napoli was listening in to a phone line left open at the library desk.
I could hear them speaking, as well as the children in the library. And there was the definite sound of gunshots.
They actually fired out the windows at the police officers, and 2 of those police officers, or deputy sheriffs, fired back. They then walked over and they started systematically shooting the kids.
They treated it like it was a game, like they were having fun. At one point, they would pop underneath a table, they would say something like peekaboo, and they would shoot someone.
I think that they were enjoying themselves through a good portion of the shooting. There was a lot of hooting and hollering and false bravado between the 2 of them.
3 would be shot dead and 4 injured before Harris and Klebold worked their way towards Craig Scott.
They came over to where I was, and they saw Isaiah. And Isaiah was one of the very few African-American students in our school. And I believe Dylan called Eric over and using a racial slur. We have an N-word over here. At one point, he was kind of backing up underneath the table. And then at one point, he was being pulled out. And this is something that came up in my memory later. I remember Isaiah said, "I want to see my mom." They shot Isaiah, and then they turned their gun towards Matt, and they shot Matt. I had decided to pretend to be dead and not draw any attention to myself. And so I laid there, and I could hear their last breaths being taken.
5 more students would lose their lives, leaving 10 dead and 12 injured in the deadly library spree, before Harris and Klebold left the room at 11:36 a.m. and began wreaking further havoc around the school.
Deputy County Sheriff's Office, do you have an emergency?
Yes, we do. Can you guys send lots and lots of paramedics?
We have paramedics, we have fire, and we have police en route.
SWAT sniper Sean Duggan was one of several law enforcement officers with children at the school.
I got a page and it said, all SWAT respond to a critical incident. So I have all my gear and I'm trying to call my daughter, and she's not answering her page, and she was a senior in the school that day. So I'm a little frantic that she's not responding.
Hundreds of emergency personnel were flocking to the school.
There was ambulances and fire trucks and police cars and sheriff's cars parked everywhere. And children were running from the school at breakneck speeds as fast as they could.
I was running for my life. And when I got behind the police car, I couldn't help but be thinking about Matt and Isaiah, because there was still a little bit of breathing. And I felt a little like a coward.
Oh my God! I was under a table and people were getting shot all around me.
It was overwhelming to see the emotion on these kids' faces, and I knew that the world had changed.
And there's so many people. Oh my God.
Everybody was calling 911 from inside the school, from outside the school. So the information that we were getting was conflicting.
As a sniper, you ask what your rules of engagement are. Is this a deadly force situation? And I was told if any high school age kids come out in black trench coats with weapons, they were to be shot.
Amongst the confusion, the name of one suspect began to trickle out.
I spoke to Brooke Brown, who's a student. Okay. He's given me good suspect information. I think this is the guy. Okay, what do you got for a name? Okay, last name is Harris. He was friends with him approximately 2 years ago, but then he started acting really strange. Okay.
It would be revealed that Eric Harris's behavior had already been seriously worrying some people.
Along the way, Eric did let out a lot of signs. He had on his website talking about how he wanted to kill all sorts of people, hundreds of people, wanted to kill everybody in Denver. And in particular, Brooks Brown, his former friend.
Disputes like the incident with the broken windshield had put Brown on Harris's hit list.
Brooks was supposed to pick Eric up for school, and Brooks was terrible with being on time, and Brooks slept in and didn't pick him up, and that was it. That was it. And I said to Brooks, can you smooth it over? And Brooks said, it doesn't work that way with Eric. And so that was the indication Eric doesn't forgive. He was an injustice collector.
Dylan, who was still friends with, and had been lifelong friends with Brooks, warned Brooks to go to a website and see what was going on.
He was posting threats about wanting to kill Brooks, and that's the thing we took to the police. And from when he started making the death threats, he wasn't allowed in our house anymore. We knew that Eric was dangerous. We did not know Dylan was
When we turned them into the police, Eric was into pipe bombs, and he was talking about it on his website.
There was actually a search warrant drawn up, but then was never taken before a judge to search Eric's house. That was never followed up on because there was another series of murders in the town where the person investigating sort of went off that case for a while and never picked it up again.
X. But Harris and Klebold's plan involved something much worse than homemade pipe bomb grenades, as Sean Graves, still paralyzed and bleeding half inside the cafeteria door, was about to experience.
I started hearing the gunshots getting closer, and that's when I realized that they were coming down the stairs in the cafeteria. They just kept getting closer and closer and closer, and I started hearing explosions. But every time there was a shot and then one of those larger booms went off, I flinched.
Harris and Klebold's killing spree had not just been planned as a shooting. Before they had opened fire that morning, they had placed 2 large explosive devices in the canteen. They had been timed to explode at 11:17 a.m., and the 2 students had planned to wait outside to pick off any survivors fleeing the scene.
Eric Harris had even gone so far as to study how many people were in the cafeteria at any given time during the lunch hour. So he set those bombs to go off when he would have the mass casualty. Approximately 450 is what he was estimating, and we had 455 kids down there.
The bomb's timers had not worked, which is why Harris and Klebold had begun their killing spree with their guns. However, they'd not given up on their dream of blowing up the school.
Well, I didn't know it at the time. There was actually a propane canister bomb, essentially, that was no more than 5 feet from where I was laying. And they were shooting at it, trying to get the bomb to go off.
Their new attempts to detonate the bombs only succeeded in a relatively small partial explosion and fire. But they were a sign of a highly planned, premeditated suicide mission.
These 2 students did not just snap. In this case, it was clear they began talking about doing something like this just about a little over a year before. Eric Harris's first entry in his journal, in his notebook, is April 10th, 1998. The first words I read, I think, kind of set the tone, and it was, I hate the effing world.
You know, he's not talking about hating jocks. He's not talking about, you know, any kind of particular group. Later, he makes fun of just about everybody. People who drive too slow in the fast lane, people who say across instead of across, or, you know, mispronounce words, you know. Any trivial thing, you know, there's nothing too trivial for Eric to have contempt for you.
Dylan also had a lot of writings and notes that he left. His centered around his emotions, his feelings, He clearly stated he was depressed. He clearly stated that his life was a mess.
Dylan's journal went on for 2 years, and the very first page, he talks about killing himself. He had a miserable perception of himself, and often at complete odds with reality.
He was, in my mind, a classic adolescent depressive, or going through an adolescent depressive episode. When confronted with some of his inappropriate behavior, he would get extremely angry, whereas when people confronted Eric with some of his earlier misbehaviors, he would respond in a classic psychopathic way. He would tell you what you wanted to hear, promise never to do it again, and would be looking you in the eyes and deliberately telling you what he thought you wanted to hear.
Harris had a personality disorder that made him lacking in empathy for the suffering of victims, made him very manipulative and crafty. You know, he had an uncanny ability to present himself any way he wanted, so he looked like a good guy to many people. But actually, he didn't have a conscience, or what Sigmund Freud called a superego.
Brooks Brown's mother experienced Eric's excuses when his father sent him around to apologize for damaging her son's windscreen.
He looked at me and he said, "Mrs. Brown, I'm sorry, I didn't mean any harm." And I said, "Look, Eric, you can pull the wool over everyone's eyes, but you're not going to do it over mine. You come by this house, you threaten my kid, you do damage, I'm going to call the police. So you stay away from our house and stay away from me." And he said, "Are you calling me a liar?" And I said, "Yes, I am. And don't come around the house again." And he got bright red. I mean, he was so angry at me, and he left the house.
Together, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had become a deadly partnership. And the two killers were now wreaking havoc not only inside the school, but outside too, as parents feared for the fate of their children.
About the time I got to my sniper position, my phone rang, and it was my daughter. And I said, "Are you okay?" She says, "Yeah, I'm home." And I said, "Okay, I have to go. I love you." And we hung up.
Many parents, including Daniel Mauser's father, learned of the unfolding events through the media.
There on the television was news coverage. It looked terrible. But I said to myself, well, if there's something going wrong at the school, certainly my son wouldn't be involved. He was not somebody who'd be in trouble or being targeted by somebody. When I got home, my wife had a very concerned look on her face. Why wasn't he calling us? So I agreed to go to another school where a number of the students were being taken in school buses after they escaped. And as I was driving, I was listening to the news coverage. And at one point, I heard them mention that they were taking some students to the hospital. And one of the ones they mentioned was a 15-year-old boy who was shot. So of course, the first thing I thought was, 15 years old, that's how old Daniel is. What if that's Daniel? Could that be my son?
At the nearby elementary school, many parents would be reunited with their traumatized kids.
I saw parents walking out with children. And I just said to myself, I want to be one of them. I want to get this over with. I want to be one of those people.
By 12:02 p.m., Columbine High School, cafeteria exit, student Sean Graves, bleeding profusely, had passed out. Meanwhile, 2 medic units approached his location.
I drove around the south side as we're pulling into the parking lot through all the cars, see several students hiding behind cars, several deputies with their weapons trained on the building.
I couldn't figure out what woke me up, but when I did snap back to it, there was some commotion behind me, and as I overlooked my shoulder, there was an ambulance sitting right behind me. I saw 2 paramedics. One jumped out of the driver's seat and the other from the back of the ambulance, and they grabbed me, picked me up by my shirt and my belt, and they were dragging me out. And I remember just looking down to see my arms and my legs dangling. And that's when the shooters realized that somebody was down there helping us. and I could see the concrete, just poofs of white dust. They were opening fire on us. They were trying to kill us again.
Holed up amongst the dead and injured in the library, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold now had their weapons trained on the paramedics and casualties below. By 12:02 p.m. on the 20th of April 1999, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had been running amok in Columbine High School for more than 40 minutes, leaving a trail of dead and injured in their wake. Then, as fire department paramedics moved in to assist casualties, like Sean Graves and his friends, Harris and Klebold began firing on the kids and rescuers.
I found Medic 13's crew were struggling to get Sean Graves loaded up into the medic unit. So I came up in the middle of him, and one had the head, the other had the feet, and we stepped into the ambulance.
They threw me in first.
Saw another young man laying by the fence, and he turned his head and made eye contact with me and said, "Help me." I scooped up and dumped the young man literally into the back of the ambulance so that they could get out of the gunfire.
I just remember hearing the sounds of bullets hitting the top of the ambulance, just the metal tinging. And that's, I'll take that away from all of that as being a sound that I'll never forget.
It would be among the last acts of Harris and Klebold's killing spree.
They were shooting at the cops, they were taking pot shots, and police were firing back. And I think they realized the only escape was going to be into the long arm of the law and a prosecution and jail and prison. And I think there was a thought of, let's end this the way we want it to end. Let's control our own destiny.
At around 12:08 p.m., Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold took their own lives. But for the children of Columbine High School and their parents, the nightmare was far from over.
Kids would leave Columbine and they would be placed on a bus and reunified with their parents. And as the night went on, buses were not arriving and there were still parents left.
After nothing happening for a while, they informed us that there was one last school bus that was coming. One last school bus with students.
But for some desperate parents, clinging on to the hope that their children would return, there was to be no happy ending.
Later on, the authorities confirmed to us that they made a terrible mistake. There was no last school bus.
At the end of the day, we had 13 innocent people killed, which were 12 students and one teacher. In addition, Harris and Klebold also dead by apparent suicide in the library. So we knew we had 15 fatalities, most of the fatalities in the library.
For Craig Scott, who had suffered the trauma of having his friends murdered beside him in the library, there was worse to come when he learned of the fate of his sister.
Rachel was the first one that was killed, and she had been killed right outside the school library. And I realized that when I ran out of the school, I had ran right by Rachel. And
my son was one of the last that was shot. He was next to last who was shot. And from the reports that we have, Eric Harris looked at Daniel and insulted him. I believe it was, he called him Four Eyes because he wore glasses. And he fired a shot that went into Daniel's hand. Daniel fought back. he took the chair that was there and he pushed it towards Eric Harris. And for that, he paid with his life. Eric Harris fired one more time and shot him in the face. Killed him.
So what caused these two students, both just weeks away from graduating, to have such disdain for human life?
These two kids did not come out of their mother's womb hating. What happened from the time they were born to the time that they carried out this horrific act?
One thing that is erroneous is to talk about why they did this, implying that it was for the same reasons. They were two basically different guys. In my colloquialisms, I would say Eric Harris was filled with anger, with rage. He wanted to hurt other people and didn't care if he died. Dylan, on the other hand, I believe was hurting inside and at various times wanted to die because he felt so bad he just saw no reason to keep on living.
People who study these call them dyads, and there's a long history of Bonnie and Clyde, Leopold and Loeb. And very often, most often, you have a stronger person and a weaker person. In this case, Dylan had incredibly low self-esteem, needed somebody to validate him, make him feel good about himself.
Some consider bullying at the school to be the primary factor.
Once you hate the bullies and no one does anything to defend you, you hate the people in the class that don't say anything. You hate the teacher that doesn't say anything. You hate the counselors that allow it to happen. They, in essence, end up hating the school, not just the bullies. They hate the school, and they want to kill the school.
I think that they didn't see that they had a lot going for them. They became isolated, and that isolation and then exposure to a lot of negative influences in their life that they chose to focus on, I think really took them towards a darker and darker place.
Harris was the dominant person who inspired the Columbine massacre. And I think Klebo went along to get along. It was that chemistry that created this insane circumstance where they were able to kill lots of people with moral impunity.
For the Columbine teachers, students, and parents, life would never be the same again.
I was paralyzed from the waist down. I spent months in the hospital. They didn't foresee me ever walking again. And I was angry. I was very angry about that. But at the same time, I'm extremely stubborn. So I didn't let that be the end of it. I made a goal for myself to walk across the stage at graduation. I wanted to be able to graduate knowing that I didn't let those two control my life. I didn't let them ruin my life. And I've actually been walking ever since.
For 911 dispatcher Rene Napoli, who listened as 10 children were murdered in the library, the enormity of what she'd heard soon hit home.
My first day off, I went to pick up my children from high school, and I had a really hard time picking up my own children from high school. So much so that my son had to drive home. And that's when it really hit me, is that I'm able to pick up my children from high school and somebody else is not able to do that.
The words that we have here were written by my wife. She did a great job of summing up Daniel's life and what this means to us to have this here, to honor him. Wow. It's like they did it for Daniel.